Sometimes silence really does speak volumes. That's kind of where our sources start today.
Right, but they argue that this silence we're seeing more of, it's often a sign of something broken, a failure to connect.
Exactly. So today we're diving deep into this really troubling idea. How the way our language is changing, maybe even decaying, seems directly linked to losing empathy.
And losing our sense of shared humanity along with it. It's a serious connection they're drawing.
Yeah, no kidding. The authors really push us to think about some recent awful events.
Yeah.
Violence, young people hurting themselves and others.
And their point is, before we jump to conclusions or blame, maybe we need to ask, what's actually happened to the words we use, to language itself?
It's a different angle, isn't it?
It really is. The core idea they put forward is that we stop seeing each other as human. Well, the source puts it beautifully. When language loses its warmth.
Loses its warmth. Wow. So the tools we use to connect are becoming blunt, careless.
That's the argument. So careless that they stop describing the world we share, and instead they just sort of destroy our ability to understand each other.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. Getting into the mechanics of how words used badly become destructive instead of descriptive.
And there's one specific trend online that illustrates this perfectly. The use of the term NPC.
Ah, yes. NPC, it's everywhere, isn't it? Especially online, but you hear it creeping into just regular conversation now.
Or anyone who doesn't know, it stands for non-player character. It's from video games.
Right, the background character is run by the computer. They have set lines, no real thoughts or feelings of their own, supposedly.
Exactly. And at first glance, calling someone that might seem like, oh, just a dismissive online joke, trivial, maybe?
But the research we looked at digs much deeper. It focuses on the actual sociological impact of using that label.
And it's pretty damaging. Because it's not just an insult, it's an act of, well, semantic degradation, you could say. Meaning, the research shows that calling someone an NPC is deliberately framing them as, and I'm quoting loosely here, not real, not feeling, not alive.
Wow, so you're basically saying they don't have agency. No inner life.
Precisely. You're denying their complexity, their humanity, really.
It's kind of wild is how fast that went from being like a niche internet thing to something you hear in political arguments or social commentary. But hang on, hasn't every generation sort of claimed language is going downhill? What makes this NPC thing different? Is it actually worse?
That's a fair question. The humanization isn't new, obviously. But this term, coming from the digital world, it's almost perfectly designed for what psychologists call moral disengagement.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Moral disengagement.
It means it makes it easier to switch off your empathy. Think about it. Older insults might be like sheep or drone, but even those imply some kind of existence, right?
Yeah, biological at least.
Yeah. But NPC, that's designed to reduce a person to just .code, a predictable script. You're mentally stripping away everything that makes them a person and seeing them as a simulation.
Huh. So it basically gives the speaker permission to just stop listening. Because why listen if you've already decided they're just a predictable program?
Exactly. Their actual words become irrelevant in your mind.
And that's the crisis in recognizing personhood you mentioned earlier. Language losing its relational warmth or complexity.
That's it. When our everyday language consistently denies the reality of other people, their struggles, their worth, the chance they might actually have a point or surprise us, then our shared world it shrinks.
It gets colder, more divided.
Definitely colder, narrower, and frankly, much more hostile.
Which leads us straight from this specific example, the NPC label, to the bigger philosophical idea the source uses to frame this whole crisis.
Right, they bring in Wittgenstein.
And that really powerful quote.
Yeah, it's the anchor for this whole discussion.
Yeah.
The limits of my language mean the limits of my world.
Boom. And suddenly, careless language, calling people NPCs, is not just rude, it potentially limits your entire reality.
That's the connection. If your world, your ability to see things clearly, to connect, to even feel responsibility, is shaped by the words you use.
And if your vocabulary is getting smaller, harsher, more dismissive,
then our world is shrinking too. Our capacity for understanding is literally shrinking.
Can you give a practical example of how that works?
Sure, think about it. If your language doesn't have good words for nuance, for paradox, for empathy, for seeing something from another's perspective,
then those things kind of stop existing in your world, or at least become very hard to grasp.
Pretty much. If you only have words for us and them, you literally can't articulate we. The source makes a strong case that this carelessness with words directly leads to our sense of responsibility just shriveling up.
Because the words aren't about describing reality anymore.
Exactly. The source argues they become purely performative. It's about scoring points, winning the argument, getting likes from your side. It's not about finding truth or, actually understanding someone else.
And when language is just a weapon for winning, responsibility goes out the window, doesn't it?
Yeah, why care about the impact of your words if they're just tools to win, not descriptions of reality?
If the goal isn't connection, but just, rhetorical conquest, your words don't need to be true or fair. They just need to work in the moment.
So meaning gets lost, and our moral obligation connected to speech just evaporates.
That's the danger. It raises this really chilling possibility that we're losing the ability for actual dialogue. The shared effort to figure things out together.
Replaced by just tribal signaling, shouting labels back and forth. That's the cost, the human cost the sources are getting at, that feeling of being unable to bridge the gap because the words just aren't there or they've been weaponized. It leaves people feeling incredibly isolated.
Okay, so if our language is limiting our world and eroding responsibility, how do we get out of this? Do the sources offer a way forward?
Thankfully, yes. They don't just diagnose a problem. The solution they propose is actually quite simple, but maybe revolutionary today.
Which is?
We need to learn how to speak again.
Learn to speak again. Okay.
Right.
What does that mean? It's not about, grammar lessons.
No, it's not about censorship or new rules either. It's about fundamentally rebuilding how we approach conversation, rebuilding the foundations.
How? It sounds like a massive cultural task.
It starts small. It starts with a change in posture. The source talks about aiming for speech that is not louder, but gentler.
Gentler. What does that mean in practice? Not just being nice.
Not necessarily weak or passive, no. Gentler here means speech that's brave enough to handle complexity, to acknowledge that things aren't always simple, that people you disagree with might still have valid points or real feelings.
Hey.
It's about shifting the entire goal of talking to someone.
So moving away from trying to win the argument.
Yes, and instead genuinely trying to understand, making that the primary objective.
Can you illustrate that? Like in a real disagreement?
Okay, imagine a common argument, maybe about something local, like building new housing.
Zoning laws, right?
Yeah, those get heated.
The careless NPC-style approach might be, you're just a NIMBY. You only care about yourself and hate progress.
Yeah.
Right? World shrinks. Conversation over.
Shuts it right down.
The gentle approach, the re-speech the source talks about might sound more like, okay, I hear you're really concerned about how this affects your neighborhood and maybe property values. I get that change can feel threatening. Can you help me understand your perspective on that, alongside the city's need for more housing?
Okay, that immediately feels different. You're acknowledging their reality, even if you ultimately disagree.
Exactly. You refuse to reduce them to a label, to code. You make them human again, complex. You open the world back up a little.
You restore their agency in the conversation.
And that's where it becomes personal and actually empowering for the listener, for you.
Yeah.
This whole deep dive, it's a reminder that the fix isn't some top-down policy. It's in the choices you make every day.
In every conversation. Yeah. Every word you choose has the potential to rebuild a little bit of that empathy, to bring back some of that warmth and complexity that gets lost when we're careless.
You get to decide if your words build bridges or just reinforce the walls.
That really is the core takeaway from the material we looked at, the whole NPC tragedy, this broader sense of fading responsibility.
Yeah.
It stems from language failing to recognize the humanity in others.
It proves Wittgenstein's point, doesn't it? The limits of our words really do define the limits of our world.
Without a doubt.
So the final thought we want to leave you with comes straight from the source material. Begin to speak again. Maybe take a moment today. Think about a conversation you had recently that felt stuck or hostile.
And just consider, what if you aimed for gentleness in that exchange? Not necessarily agreement, but aiming for complexity, for understanding, instead of just being louder or proving you're right.
How might that one shift change the boundaries of your world, even just a little?
Moving away from that easy dismissal, that NTC label, back towards understanding. It's a choice you make with your words.
And if this resonates, maybe share this idea with someone else you know who's struggling with how hostile things feel, so more people can hear this call to, well, learn to speak again.
Yeah, it's essential work. Definitely something to think about.